Society is crumbling, almost on the verge of being a post-apocalyptic wasteland, but it only takes one man of the law, save the roads down under. And I hope that doesn't come off as offensive. I mean, the movie literally takes place in Australia, so I hope not. So bear with me.
Mad Max, the maximum force of the future.
Mad Max is directed by George Miller with a screenplay by James McCausland and George Miller and a story by George Miller and Bryon Kennedy. The film stars Mel Gibson, Joanne Samuel, Hugh, Keays-Bryne, Steve Bisley, Tim Burns, and Roger Ward. According to IMDb's plot synopsis, in a self-destructing world, a vengeful Australian policeman sets out to stop a violent motorcycle gang. Mad Max is a franchise that's been going on for 45 years. We have now hit 45 years with this movie. And it's funny how most people hadn't seen the original Mad Max at all. I bet you somebody had either watched The Road Warrior, Beyond Thunderdome, Fury Road, or just recently Furiosa. But I bet you most people hadn't seen the very first Mad Max film, at least when it came time around for The Road Warrior. But still, it's also weird how this series started out to where Furiosa would take the series later on, after Fury Road and now Furiosa. It's just kind of almost like a whiplash to see like this movie have, I don't know, green to it. Although Furiosa had green, but still, like the idea that there was trees and plants throughout this entire movie is kind of strange. But regardless, I enjoyed the film when I saw it for the first time. I think it was like a couple of years ago. I think when I was watching them all and then watched Fury Road. But having rewatched this film, I would say it's a very decent start to the series. But it has, I think, and we'll get to it later, Beyond Thunderdome, minus that film, I just think that the other films have surpassed it. And there's just some kind of outdated parts to the movie. But before giving my issues, here are some of the positives that I found with the film. I think the performances are fine. Everyone is fine in this film, but the ones that did stand out to me were Mel Gibson, Hugh Keays-Bryne, Steve Bisley, and Roger Ward. First, Mel Gibson. Listen, I understand Mel Gibson is a controversial figure in the realm of Hollywood entertainment. I am not here to defend his actions, and I do think he should be criticized for those actions. So I wanted to get that out of the way real quick, that I understand completely that the man himself is not a good person. He's just an awful person. But as an actor and director, I cannot deny he is talented. So with this movie, which I think was his very first film that he did, I think, is terrific as Max Rokitansky, a Main Force police officer, or the MFP. Gibson knows how to balance both a sane and righteous man of the law to being on the edge. Because throughout this movie, you see how Max started off. Throughout the series, we see him already be descended into madness and chaos, but we get to see how he started off being a righteous man, trying to be a police officer, trying to serve public when the entire world is on the verge of collapse, or at least in Australia, everything's gone to shit, and him and MFP are the only ones left to bring law and order. But he knows how to balance that very well throughout the movie, and I thought he did a pretty good job. Hugh Keays-Bryne is psychotic as Toe Cutter, the second-hand man to the Knight Rider, and pretty much the villain of this film altogether. Byrne plays Toe Cutter as a reflection of this world and the lawlessness that is running rampant throughout. Seeing how, if you had to depict this world as being rampant, you want to show a character that can be as deprived and as despicable, or at the very least just as terrible as you could possibly get. And I think Hugh Keays-Bryne does that pretty well with conveying Toe Cutter as just a sadistic and religious following feel that he has with his gang in worshipping the Knight Rider, who we see at the beginning of the film. But you get a sense of this guy has already fallen into the depravity of it, and is what gives life to the film with regards to showing the chaotic scenery of it. Steve Bisley is funny and loyal as Jim Goose Rains, a member of the MFP's motorcycle unit and Max's best friend. Bisley brings a bit of levity and sing to the film, an actually sane guy along with Max, although Max can teeter-totter on the edge of being insane himself. I thought he did a pretty good job with regards to his part in the film of being the only thing that, shows a little bit of like the humanity in of it all with the characters that he interacts with, especially with Gibson, because I think both Gibson and Bisley work really well together and show the camaraderie between the two. I think they had great rapport with one another, and it really does show how this guy was keeping, I would say, Max sane for a bit. He's not the sole reason, but I'm just saying that he was a part of a thing that kept Max sane and grounded. But it just truly shows their friendship. Roger Ward is stern and determined as Fred Fifi McAfee, Max's MFP captain. Ward manages to bring a sense of justice and charisma as the head of the department, which, I mean, if you had to have a figure like being that represents the MFP, I think he fits the bill well. He seems like the thing that making sure that his men are going out doing their job and making sure that the roads are safe and that, society hasn't fully collapsed with his effort of trying to make sure that it doesn't fall apart. Both Gibson and Ward are good together. Seeing the dynamic between officer and captain is done very well. Especially there's a scene regarding Max when he confronts Ward about essentially leaving. And I think it was a really well done scene that really shows the dynamic between the two. The direction is engaging. Director George Miller truly has a vision when crafting this world and makes the performers have a balance of sane and insanity. For being his first feature film, I think that this is a well done directorial debut for Miller, seeing him grow throughout the years with not just these movies, but other movies as well. But you can really see the passion that he has for this idea and this concept, and he truly brings it all in this film. The cinematography is striking. Cinematographer David Egby truly captures Miller's vision of the post apocalyptic wasteland of Australia. It makes for a chaotic and insane looking movie. The way the cameras are positioned with regards to, like, even some of the chase sequences, I think are riveting. Whether it be close to like the tires as they're moving, or just actually capturing inside of the car and seeing like other cars coming forward and whatnot. I think that was done really well. The music is stellar. Composer Bryon May balances the film out with a score that can intensify the chase sequences and violent moments altogether to calm and quiet moments, having a nice score to it, making for a thrilling and intense film altogether. Without that music, I don't know how those chase sequences would come off as being as thrilling as they could be. At least for the time, I can see how this could have easily not have worked, but they managed to, Bryon May manages to make it into a solid score that really invigorates the idea of having sanity and insane to it. Production is impressive. Of course, it is a low budget film, so I'm not expecting anything super big or grand, because I understand that for a low budget film, you got to work with what you got to work with. But it's amazing on how the cars and costumes look unique and interesting. Like, there's even like a motorcycle where, I mean, yeah, it looks like a normal motorcycle, but like in the passenger seat, there's like a hood that they like a glass roof hood that they put on, which I thought was kind of cool. Just because it's low budget doesn't mean it's not creative. I always think that with whenever you have like a lower budget, I think there is a little bit more creativeness as to how can you make this look post-apocalyptic or futuristic in a way without having to be super grand that you would later see in the movies. And I thought they did a pretty good job of making it feel like that in a way. Especially even like some of the buildings, like the police station is like a goddamn rundown mess. But I appreciate the dedication and devotion to making this feel post-apocalyptic in a way. The chase sequences are exciting. Whenever the film shows car sequences barreling down the highways, like actually showing it, it was intense, and it's really exciting to see it. Sequences that would be synonymous with the series and would keep topping itself. Like, I would say that this movie really did set gold standard on how Mad Max action sequences would look, and it started with this, and I think they did a nice job of making sure that those car sequences were as thrilling as they can be. And while I do think that the film is enjoyable, I do think that there are some issues that I have found with this movie. Like I said, with it comparing it a little bit to the other movies, but really because of, I would say, age. So here are some of the negatives that I found. The editing is rushed. Scenes would be cut together too quickly and often sped up in those car chase sequences. Part of the film that hasn't aged well the most. And if you watch it, you will see certain scenes where you could tell that everything was sped up or really like quick cut editing so that way they could hide some of the things. So I understand completely that yes, this is a low budget, but it's one of those things where you look back on it in hindsight and you will say, yeah, it does show its age because they had to cut corners in the editing department. I also think that the story isn't fully realized. Throughout the film, the story does feel like it's all over the place because it does focus on Max trying to hunt down this motorcycle gang, but for the most part, it's just kind of breezing on by. It's just kind of just showing how the post-apocalypse is like, and then at near the end of the film it becomes a revenge film that involves Max. I can understand that the film had promise, and while I do think that the story is not inherently terrible, it does show that it's just not as cohesive than it was, and maybe that was the point, but I just don't feel like it was. I feel like it was supposed to be cohesive as it is, and it just kind of feels like good ideas just not always executed the best. The villains are pretty much forgettable aside from Toe Cutter, who is, I guess you could say, the main villain that is a little bit memorable. It's really his gang that I just don't think are as interesting. They're just really underdeveloped, and they just kind of feel like they are there to push at least one character in particular, to push a storyline forward, to have it be developed, or at the very least have this character do something to another character that would set it up later on. And I just feel like most of the villains in here just didn't really weren't as investing. Even Toe Cutter in a way, like I understand completely that, it is supposed to show the depravity of the world. But I do think that even with Toe Cutter, and I do think Hugh Keays-Bryne is really good in the film, I just do think that even he can get a little bit stale near the end of the film. The writing, I will say, and I hate to sound like an asshole when I say this, I do think that the writing is bad. Screenwriters James McCausland and George Miller create dialogue that really shows its age. In particular, like you can really feel like, yeah, this is definitely a product of its time, and the way characters talk, or at the very least how scenes play out, kind of show its age. Anytime like characters have conversations with each other, especially with Max and his wife, yeah, you can definitely tell that this was a movie of the 70s and of a lower budget quality, but still, I do think that it's just another part of the movie that just has not aged gracefully. You could say that about other movies from the 70s, but when you start, those movies could still kind of hold up for the most part. This one, you start to kind of feel like, yeah, dated parts have definitely shown in this movie. It's not a bad film. I want to make that very clear. It's just compared to other films, it's just not the strongest. It's a decent start. I'm sure for the time it was an exhilarating film, even though it didn't get much attention outside of Australia or even a lot of other places, maybe a few other areas in the world, but really Australia, it didn't get a lot. Things have kind of changed with regards to how we view entertainment. And so I do think Mad Max is an enjoyable film that it's just been usurped by other films, but one that's an important part of the series and one that did start it all. So it's not something that is completely terrible. It's just aged, but it's not bad. I'm giving Mad Max a 6 out of 10. I think it is an okay film. I think if you go in with the context of knowing that, yeah, some parts have aged not too well, I think you'll be fine. But I can see where if somebody were to compare this to the other movies, yeah, I can understand people feeling like it's just not up to quality as something like The Road Warrior or Furiosa or even Fury Road. So I can understand that completely. I will now have my review for The Road Warrior and the other films leading up to Furiosa. So yes, look forward to those reviews and other movie TV show reviews coming soon.